That's a great looking t-shirt.
I'm going to be talking about that very soon. Okay, so we are now officially recording. Jamie, welcome. Tana, am I pronouncing that right?
Tana.
Welcome, welcome. And Roscoe, I don't know if I said hi to you. Welcome.
Hi.
You. Good to see all my fellow Puget Sound group people here. Loving it. And there's Helen. Don't see her yet. So we have 26, 27 people registered, Beth. So
Oh, cool.
I'm just going to give this a few minutes because I want to get as many. There's Helen. Hello, Helen. We see your beautiful face now.
Hi.
And there's Catherine.
Good to see you.
You too. Thank you. Catherine, hi. Okay, I think I have everyone. So I'm just going to start with some special announcements and just to tell you about some pretty exciting things we have coming up. So Corey and I are super excited. So if you don't know Corey and I are really great friends, business partners, all those things. So anyway, we work on all this stuff together. And anyway, we have some really cool stuff coming up. So I just wanted to mention, first off, take note, everything's backwards, so excuse that, but I have some new swag on today, and this is from Father Stephen's group, which is Warriors on the Way, which if you have not watched our interviews with Father Stephen, he's on here right now, so you can see him. He's got the cool background. Anyway, he runs a charitable organization where he takes warriors, veterans, on the Camino so that they can heal from moral injury during war. So we are big supporters of his organization, and he sent me some swag, and he sent Corey the swag too, but she didn't get it today. Otherwise, we both have it on. So anyway, check out his website if you haven't yet and learn more about what he's doing, because it's really amazing stuff. And we also interviewed him. It's on our YouTube channel. So we did 2 interviews with Father Stephen, and he's got some of, I think, some of the biggest fans out there for his videos. So check that out. As far as events coming up, I am a yoga teacher. That's what I do when I'm not doing Camino stuff. And I'm starting a program for people that are planning on going on Camino, hopefully soon, or for people who walk for fitness. And so the first class is next Tuesday night. It is at the same time, Tuesday night. You do have to register. Registration information is on our Facebook page and our newsletter. If you're not getting our newsletter, let me know. Also, our next happy hour will be Monday, April 12th, and we have a special guest. It is Meg Maloney, and Meg is the author of this book, Slow Your Roll. And I just started it. I'm just partway in, but I have attended a couple of meetings with her, and she is really fun. She will be coming to that happy hour to talk about her book. Her adult son will also be joining us, who also is a pilgrim. He went on a separate pilgrimage, and he's a singer-songwriter, so he will be singing a few songs for us, and they are wonderful. And then also Meg's publisher will also be joining us, and he also is a pilgrim, so that'll be a really fun happy hour. So that is on Monday, April 12th at 6 p.m. Mountain. We have our next Spanish lesson. That will be Tuesday, April 20th at 11 a.m. And the topic this time is conversation starters, the things that we always say, like where you're from, all the things we say along the Camino when we're meeting somebody, stopping in a shop, whatever. So Maria Seco is our teacher. She lives on the Camino Portuguese, and she is fantastic. So if you want a sample of that, you can watch our YouTube channel videos of past lessons. This last one was on travel and transportation. It was really good. And then we have our next happy hour will be, after that, will be in May, and that is with Yosemar Martinez. And Yosemar wrote Taste of the Camino. And so I'm super excited to have her here. I failed a million times in trying to make the tortilla Española, and once I got her book, I finally could successfully make it. So anyway, she will be here talking about her book and lots of fun stuff. And yeah, so that's all of our upcoming meetings so far that I just wanted to mention. So any questions about those events before we head into tonight's stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
And
yes.
where do you
yes,
have
Ross.
a list of those?
I'm sorry?
Where do you have a list of those events?
So they are on our Facebook page, the Camino Cafe, and I have events for all of those, and you'll find the links on that. Or if you want, put your email in the chat, and after this, I will put you on our emailing list, and we always have all of our links in our monthly updates as well.
Thank you.
Because I realize it's kind of hard to go back and find things on Facebook. So if you want to be added to our mailing list, again, we're not organized enough to really email you very often. It maybe is once a month. If we're lucky, it's twice a month. Okay, any other quick questions before we head into our topic tonight? Okay, so I know you're all here because Beth Jusino is in the house. So unmute. Let's all give her one Camino and welcome her very warmly because we just love the idea that she's here. So welcome, Beth.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome.
Oh,
So if everyone will mute, I just want to take a moment to ground and to just, you're free to close your eyes or just, kind of find a spot to stare at in the room, but just kind of reconnect to your Camino essence, remembering why we are all here in the first place, that we are all connected because of the Camino. And I know for Corey and I, the reason that we started the Camino Cafe was that we, during this time, during the pandemic, we didn't want to lose the spirit of the Camino. And what a gift this has become, because we've made many, many friends during this. And we are just so thankful to have this community and these opportunities to talk to people who all love the Camino as much as we do. So that leads into a reading I want to share from Beth's book. And if you've read her book, Walking to the End of the World, who has read it? And it's okay if you haven't, right? Excellent. So we welcome everyone to talk about these. And I realize sometimes it's hard to get the books done before we have a meeting. So I'm on page 12 if you wanted to look at this quote, but I wanted to lead off with this. Beth said, "Somewhere I read that each person who walks the Camino de Santiago experiences it in 3 stages. Regardless of how far they go, what shape they're in, or why they think they're there, the first third of their journey will be a test of the body, the second, a test of the mind, and the final third, I love this line, a gift to the soul." Right, so welcome, Beth. And I just wondered, Beth, if you might just expand upon that and that's in the very beginning of your book, I think actually in the foreword. Why did you feel it was important to talk about that in your book?
I can't claim that quote. And I couldn't find, I remember having read it before I went on that first Camino, and it didn't really mean as much to me then. And when I came back and was kind of reflecting on things, I remembered having said it, and I have never been able to track down the original source or who said this first. So if anybody knows, please let me know. But I think that I hear a lot of people ask questions because I did walk a path that is longer than what a lot of people do all at one time. I really pushed the boundaries of what we as Americans can do by being in Europe. And people have asked about, well, was it different or what, how did things change? And I don't think that they did. I think I had more time to experience those same thirds. I've gone back to the Camino and walked for 10 days. I've gone 12 days. I've gone back and walked for 3 weeks at a time. And you still kind of find this pattern. The first part is just settling in. And I don't care how in shape or out of shape you are, getting used to that day after day, repetitive walking, long, like that is your physical activity, takes some adjustment to the body. And those of you who read the book know that it took a lot for me because I made some mistakes in the beginning. And then even when that happens, then there's this test, then there's this settling in of your mind. For me, that happened in the middle of my journey, which happened to be the end of walking across the Le Puy route and the beginning of the Camino Francais. And so for a lot of people, that day across the Pyrenees is both an emotional high and a physical challenge because it's the first thing that they're doing it. For me, I was kind of past the physical understanding of what we were doing, but I was really in the midst of figuring out where my headspace needed to be, especially during the transitions, especially during changes of culture. And there is a huge change in culture from walking the way in France and walking the way in Spain. And finally, I settled in. People who read the book and get through the beginning of that Camino Francés part kind of come back sometimes and they're like, oh, you really didn't like it. And my answer is always, hold on, give me a couple of days. This becomes this time that really everything kind of clicks and you get that rhythm of walk, eat, sleep, repeat. And you get those people who are so close to you and you get these things and you have this opportunity to settle into that and to really enjoy it. And so when I thought about how I wanted to talk about my journey, I wanted to really highlight all of those things.
What about all of you? Do you feel like that was part of your journey? The body, and did anybody else notice that about their own Caminos? I see some nods, yeah. So Beth, you talk a lot about your princesses, your feet. So would you say that was your biggest challenge of the body?
Yes. I think there is a part in the book that says, you're probably tired of hearing about my feet. I promise you I'm tired of talking about them. But that really was, and that's partly a physical training thing. And it's partly just a knowing your own body thing. I have issues with my feet that go far beyond the Camino. I have long-term issues with plantar fasciitis. I have long-term tendonitis issues. I have my physical therapist best friend continually looks at me and is like, why do you just walk weird? That adds to all of these things. And so no matter how far I hike and how many years have gone by, this has always been my challenge in ways that I know for a lot of other pilgrims, it's their knees or their back or their, my knees have never been a problem. My feet are a disaster. Even though I don't get blisters, which is another interesting thing that comes up a lot, is that turns out that blisters, some people get them, some people don't. I'm not a blistering type person, but all of my problems are inside. But I think that everyone who has taken on a challenge like this usually finds that there is something, usually finds that there is some part of their physical journey that demands more of their attention, demands more of their emotional attention, physical attention, tends to be the thing that you make your decisions based around. I know people who have a lot of issues with sleep and so couldn't albergue on the Camino because that was the thing that they needed to take into account. And so a lot of the things in my story and the things that I chose to write about are reflections of what my journey was, but hopefully also are things that another person who is walking in their own way can see where what their story would be, what their reflection would be.
Yeah, really good point. And there's always going to be something, right? And I really love that before we even go, we try to predict what all those things are going to be. Mm-hmm. And I kind of smile now when I read posts and people bring stuff up and I'm like, oh, you have no idea, but there will be something, but you can't necessarily just predict it.
Right. And I had heard, everything I had seen on the posts on the Facebook had been all about blisters. And I don't know if I really brought this out in the book, but I came so prepared for blisters. I had like 400 Band-Aids of different sizes. I had the Compeed. I had the tape. I had all of the stuff that sat in a bag and never got used. And what I didn't have were arch supports, which is what I turned out to need. And I hadn't really ever seen discussed back then.
Yeah, definitely. So Beth, you talk about in the book that, you weren't a big hiker. You were more of a city walker and you kind of viewed this as like, hey, this is going to be really quaint. I'm going to walk from cute European village to cute European village, right? And then that was not the case, but you really took on a big challenge with 1,000 miles. I mean, you did 1,000 miles in like 79 days.
We did 1,000 miles in 79 days. Yes.
How did you wrap your head around that idea? Because I mean, that's, not everybody walks 1,000 miles. That was huge.
I try. Okay, so there's two things. First of all, that is what I thought the Camino was. When I was first introduced to it, I was introduced to it by someone else's book, which is called Pilgrimage to the End of the World, a little book by Conrad Rudolph, I think. All of my books are still in boxes. Okay. But he had walked a 3-month Le Puy to Santiago journey. And so the first thing that you hear is kind of what sticks in your head is this is the way it's done. And so it was months or maybe even years later before I understood that most people only walked in Spain. And so that was part of how I went into this is like, oh, this is what we do. And we had kind of been talking about a longer sabbatical, and 3 months seemed like the right amount of time. And then beyond that, I learned very quickly, you just don't think about the big picture. You don't think about, oh, this is 1,000 miles. I have 980 some miles to go. You think about tomorrow. Yeah. You think about, I have those 20 kilometers and then those 20 kilometers. And it's only when you're really done. I know that there was a point when I came home at the end and there's a globe on a bookshelf. And I looked at a globe and went, I can see on a globe where I started and finished. And that is probably the biggest, the clearest way to scale it for me that I've ever kind of figured.
Beautiful. Do you feel like you reflect back on that now when things get tough? I mean, I'm proud of what I accomplished on the Camino, but I didn't walk 1,000 miles. I feel like I would use that a lot. Like, hey, you can do this. You walked 1,000 miles.
Yes and no. I mean, I think that I am just as proud of the time I went back to Spain 2 years after that walk and walked for 14 days and something like 200 miles, because that was a trip with its own challenges. And again, you're still thinking about 20 kilometers a day. I just did a lot more 20-kilometer days than other people had time to do. So there's that. There's also, I don't think I put this in the book. When I first came home and I was super excited, those of you who have walked the Camino know that you come home and you're just like buzzy and let me tell you all the stories and let me just tell you what I just did, like random strangers in the grocery store. Hi, I was just in Spain. And so I was talking to a colleague her mother happened to walk by, and my colleague introduced me to her mother at this, I don't remember where we were, and said, oh, this is Beth. She just walked 1,000 miles across Europe. And her mother responded, and I know what she meant to say. I want to say that up front, but her actual words were, oh, you must feel so self-righteous. And I went, that's good. And she meant you must feel so proud of yourself. And it just came out really wrong. And that happens. That's fine. But I thought, I don't feel I am proud of myself, but I also learned how accessible and how doable something that seems so big becomes when you do break it down. I think the biggest thing I walked away with was the thing that seems impossible becomes doable if you approach it that way. If you approach it thinking that you can do this, you will find the ways to do this. And if it's walking across a portion of the flipping globe, then that's what you do, because it was 20 kilometers a day.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things I really love about your book, Beth, is that you write it in such a way that it's very relatable. And I think you make everyone feel like this is doable. 1,000 miles is doable. It seems like it is insurmountable, but you make it seem doable. Not that you made it seem easy, right? Because you talk about the challenges you had, but you make it seem possible.
Right. And that was really the intent. I've had a lot of feedback from people who are like, oh, well, this isn't really a book about you. And I think that that's important. And that was a very intentional choice. Is when I started writing this book was about the time that Wild, you remember the Cheryl Strayed book, was just out and very popular. Or maybe it was right when the movie came out. Anyway, Wild was on the radar. And there were a lot of these kind of travel books written by usually women, but men as well, who were writing about their personal journey, their inner personal journey. And the trip that they were taking was the backdrop of that. And those can be beautiful, amazing books. What I wanted to do, though, is I wanted to write for that woman who said, you must feel so self-righteous. I wanted to write for the person who came to me and said, oh, I could never do something like what you did. I'm not into extreme sports. And I mean, you're a yoga teacher. I think yoga is an extreme sport. So I wanted to write something that kept the camera on the Camino itself and gave people a way to see themselves in that situation. I wanted somebody to have a view of the Camino that was so detailed about the trail and the life and the challenges and the surprises. It was all about the surprises. And I really didn't want them to know what I thought about my mother. My mother's lovely, but that's not the story. The story isn't me. I'm just the narrator of the story. And I think that that's an important distinction that comes out when you read a lot of different Camino books. That this is the one that will give you the details on, like, how do you get an albergue room and where are the bathrooms and things like that as well.
Right. And I think that makes your book very refreshing because it's a different angle of things. For those of you that aren't familiar with Beth, she is in the book industry. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what you do professionally. And I actually got to sample some of the stuff that she does because I attended a workshop that she did with Steve Watkins. So maybe you can touch upon that, some of the stuff that you do with Steve as well.
And Steve is actually, I mean, for those of you who are reading Camino books, if you have not read Pilgrim Strong, Steve and I happened to be walking the Camino on the same year. We didn't quite overlap, but we were so close that we met each other online and became friends. And then both ended up writing very different books about the same general time period. I am, by day, my day job is, I call myself a publishing consultant, which means that I work with people who are writing books. I'm a developmental editor, which means I read manuscripts and I tell you how to make them better. I'm a ghostwriter. I'm a publishing consultant, which means that tomorrow I have a phone call with somebody who says, I wrote this manuscript, I don't know what to do with it next. And we're going to talk through that process. My background, I've been in book publishing for 20 years. So this is the thing. I'm not much of an outdoors person, but I do know a lot about how the book business and industry work.
Okay. So, you talked about that you and your husband were wanting to take a sabbatical. So when you were planning this trip, were you planning also to write a book, or did that come after or while you were there? Like, when did the inspiration that, hey, wait a minute, I got a book here?
It didn't come until afterwards. I was very serious about taking a sabbatical. My day job was, I run my own business. I'm an independent consultant, which means, we're working 6 days a week, 80 hours a week. Like, there was a lot going on at that point. I like to joke that I had 3 different inboxes at that point, and this color-coded calendar that was always beeping. And the last thing I wanted was to look at a screen or to think about a screen. One of the decisions that we made that was really unusual is we went entirely offline for the length of our Camino. And that was partly because this was a sabbatical. This was a break from being accountable and relatable and thinking about things through the filter of other people. I did not want my Camino to be filtered through how I would describe it to someone else if I was doing it, even through the simple ways of, Facebook or Instagram. And it was after I got home and I did journal all the way through, because we got, at the end of the first day, I looked at Eric and I said, if every day is this crowded and we meet this many people and we see this many things, we're never going to remember it. We're going to get, 2 weeks in and be like, where was that? What was that town with the cow and the thing? And so I just have this, kind of emotional rant of a journal. And he was taking notes as well, just for our own sake of remembering. And I got back, and it really was actually going back to this story I keep telling of this poor woman who is self-righteous, that I thought, I learned a lot of things that I wish I had been able to find before I went. I think I could write this down. And so we got back in July, and in November, I took myself to a hotel out on the Pacific coast. Off season on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is like the perfect time to be there if you just need some solo thinking time. And in that 3-day kind of mini retreat, I started the website, I started a blog, I wrote the first 3 chapters and an outline of what I thought the entire book would be, and just kept going, and it kept being a good idea.
Okay. So you journaled every day, basically. Was there a rhyme or reason as to what you journaled every day? Did you have certain prompts that you were making sure that you were recording, or how did that develop?
It was nothing. None of my journaling has ever been that formal. And this definitely wasn't. This definitely was just a way to process the things that I was seeing and a way to record the things that I wanted to remember. If you look at it, it's not something that is formal, and sometimes it's very ranty about my feet. Usually I don't know where I'm staying, and I have this tendency to write things like, I'm staying in this place that sounds like living hell, or I'm staying in this place that sounds like Azkaban, if you've read the Harry Potter books. And then when I got back and started writing, I would open the guidebooks. I always had like the guidebooks and a couple of websites open to do some of the background research. It's not like I was looking up the histories of these places in the journals. That all came later in the writing.
Okay. So I know in my dreams, I have written my Camino book several times, but have never really sat down to start it. So I just wonder if you could maybe offer some advice, because I'm guessing everybody on this call probably has some amazing stories from their own Caminos, and they might want to write a blog post or anything about, or hopefully a book. What recommendations would you have for those of us that have gone that might want to write a book? Where would we start, or what would be the best advice you think you could give us?
That's a great question. I think that a couple of things. I think that your journal is not the book. Your journal is your collection of in the moment reflections or memories or experiences or whatever. When you're going to step back to think about a book, you have to think about the person who's reading it, and what they are looking for is more important than what you want to say. And that is just as a general publishing principle, this isn't Camino specific, but that is often a hard concept to process through. But I wasn't, the things that I wanted to write, I needed a purpose in writing that was based on what the reader was looking for and couldn't find somewhere else. There are a lot of Camino stories out there. There are a lot more Camino memoirs now than there were in 2017 when I first started talking to a publisher about this. So what is it that you bring that's different? I love that you're talking to Yasmar. I think her Camino cookbook is fantastic. And it's that thing that nobody else has done.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I have a friend in Canada who just wrote a young adult novel set on the Camino, with, I think, 6 teens who are doing a walk together, and some of them are LGBTQ, and some of them are going through all of these other issues. And it's fascinating because it doesn't exist already. It's something very different, and it was a way for him to reflect his Camino. Excellent. He would be a great person for your book club, by the way.
Has that been published yet?
Yep. Kevin Craig. Kevin Craig. The book is The Camino Club.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we will check that out for sure. So that brings us to the next topic. And I just wanted to say, I'm going to ask Beth here another question, another topic. But if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I will be opening up to unmute, and you can ask her some questions as well in a few moments. But I wanted to read from page 69, and this really stood out to me very strongly in your book, because I feel like, it's all of our stories, I think, once we're there, but we don't know it until we walk. Before we left for the Camino, I read everything I could, including plenty of Camino memoirs. I was desperate for practical information and advice, but I noticed that every personal story focused mostly on the people the authors met along the way. Wait, I wanted to say to the writers, you're walking through this magnificent country and all you can talk about is the Austrian guy you met at dinner? Where are your priorities? And then I went to France. I started walking and met the people, and they became the center of my story too. So I wondered if you could touch upon that, Beth, because you have some great people that you walked with, some great characters. And I just wonder what that felt like when you got there and you realized, wait a minute, this is it. And maybe share with everyone how you came to that conclusion and what that meant for you during your walk.
I think it took, because of where we started and because we did not speak French, and because we started in early April. We started 3 days after Easter, which especially in France is really the beginning of the Camino season. There weren't a lot of people out there with us, and the people who were there were almost exclusively French. I think it took us 3 days before we met somebody who English was a comfortable native language for them.
Okay.
And so we had this kind of very quiet period at the beginning, and then we would meet these people, and your Camino days kind of stretch, right? You walk, and then at the end of walking, and especially in France, you tend to end in these very remote areas. So it's not even like there's a city to explore or a town. You are sitting around a yard with other people, and they are from all over the world and all walks of life. And you're never starting a conversation asking about somebody's job. You're asking about who they are. I felt like I started hearing very real, very personal stories almost as soon as I started interacting with people in a comfortable way. And they became the people who just determined, how far do you walk in a day? It's not, oh, I want to make sure I see this cathedral. It's, oh, I want to make sure I'm staying where Jan's staying tonight, or where the Dane is staying tonight, or somebody. And thinking about how to write about them is interesting and challenging. And there are a lot of people who aren't in the book, not because they're not important, but because, again, I was looking to kind of reflect certain personalities and certain characters throughout. But you don't have, if you're one day ahead or one day behind, I know people, I have good friends who crossed the Pyrenees 2 days after we did. And it's not that they had different weather, it's that they had a different community of people. And so their experience over the Pyrenees was entirely different. I could walk the same trail again and have an entirely different time, because I don't have Marika, because I don't have Chris, Rory and Liz. I don't have these people who became part of my story. Did that answer your question?
I totally agree.
I just started talking.
Yeah, it did. And, I think for me, and I've heard this from a lot of other pilgrims, is that the right people always showed up with the right story at the right time, or the right advice at the right time. Can you think of somebody, during your walk that happened for you, that it was just the right person for you to meet right at that moment?
I think that, that's an interesting question. No one's ever asked that. I think that I would say we met Nick, who was from Switzerland, just in Rioja, just before we started the Meseta. And we had been walking at different paces. We had had a stomach flu. We had had a friend come and walk with us for a few days. And so Spain, the Camino Francés, took longer for us to really connect with people, because we kept having those weird scheduling issues. And, we get sick for 2 days and everybody goes ahead. Right. And probably the most intense friendship I had in my Spanish part was with Nick, who we met a day or we sat down with him from Burgos for the first time. And then we spent every day on the Meseta, and the Meseta is great area for talking and for conversation. And so having somebody whose life is entirely different and whose language is entirely different, but they're so comfortable together and you have so much fun together, that was probably one of my most fun weeks in Spain. And then in Lyon, we had to stay an extra day because we had somebody coming in, and he went on and we never saw him again. And that's kind of the Camino friendship, right? That is there's this very definite beginning and ending, usually based on schedules and travel. But we had Nick for the extent of the Meseta, and that was probably the thing.
Yeah, I think you captured that perfectly in your book. When you would talk about, oh, this was the final time we saw so-and-so, this
Mhm.
was when we said goodbye and we never caught up with them again, or we
Mhm.
thought we would see these people again and we never did. And how heartbreaking that is if you don't get their name or some
Yeah.
contact information. So I'm guessing that people, if they're like me when they're reading your book, we kind of want to know like what happened to some of these people, right? And so anyone that you've kept up with or you want to give a report on, say, hey, this is where they are, they're okay.
So let's see. Eugene, I'm a little at a disadvantage because I actually, my book is still in a box somewhere back there, so I didn't have it. But Eugene from Australia, the first person we met, is still in email contact, sends us pictures. He was in the area of the wildfires probably 2 years ago now. Was volunteering. He's doing great. He's been back to walk. He made it to Santiago eventually. He went back to walk Norte. He actually, somehow I hadn't told him about the book, and a Camino friend of his in Canada read it and contacted him and said, I think this is you, which is kind of a hilarious way for that to happen. Speaking of that area of the world, Rory and Liz, the chef and his girlfriend who got engaged in Santiago, and we spent our last days in Finisterre, so bookending this, now live in New Zealand. They have a charming little boy. They did get married. They have a baby who's probably now 2. Seem to be doing really well. The Dane went to art school the last I saw and heard. She was doing various kinds of artistic graphic design that I don't really understand because most of her Instagram posts are in Danish. Which is kind of, I don't know if the rest of you have noticed this, but my social media feeds got so much more lingual. Even if you only talk to people in English, they're posting in Dutch, they're posting in Danish, they're posting in German, which is kind of a nice way of remembering that you're connected to a lot of other things.
Yeah.
I could keep, I stayed in touch mostly with people who have social media. Obviously, that's kind of the easiest way to do it. I happened to be in Spain in 2017 and ran into Caroline and spent a day with her. She just looked at me and said, you're not wearing the same clothes. I almost didn't recognize you. We only know each other in our Camino gear. And when you're wearing just a normal t-shirt and your hair is curled.
Right. When you get cleaned up and people are like, oh, that's what you look
Oh,
like.
that's who you are. Okay. Yeah. The mother-daughter duo that I call Maine and Florida actually were in Maine when the book came out. The book came out in the fall of 2018. And my parents happened to live in Maine. So I was out there for something for them and did a book event in a bookstore in Portland. And they happened to be in town and came to it. And it was hilarious. Somewhere I have the side-by-side pictures of us in the plaza in Santiago looking like pilgrims, and us standing in this bookstore in Portland with the hair cleaned and curled and colored and all of these things. So that's always fun. It's fun to see people in the real world.
Yeah, I agree. Catherine asked a question in the chat and she said, what was it like for you to go back to the Caminos? So do you want to touch upon what caused you to go back and what that was like?
Yeah. So the story in the book is from 2015. I came home and was doing all of the talking, like, this thing happened and I'm writing a book and I'm doing this stuff. And a good friend of mine, her name is Laurel, really, really wanted to do the Camino. Felt led to walk for a while. It was her 70th birthday. She and a friend were going to go the year that she turned 70. And at the last minute, her friend had to back out for family reasons. And so she and I were having dinner, and she had never traveled outside the country by herself at that point and was feeling very uncomfortable with the idea of going just solo. And kind of on a whim, I said, well, I can't go with you for the whole thing, but if you want, I can take a couple of weeks and I'll fly to Spain and I'll walk with you for like the first 10 days or something, 10 days, 2 weeks. And it'll help you figure out the pattern. And by then you're good and you'll just keep going. And that's what ended up happening is that in 2017, it's the only time I've been without Eric. But my friend Laurel and I went. We flew into Barcelona, took a train to Pamplona, started walking in Pamplona, and I stayed with her until my feet gave out on me again. I stayed with her until Santo Domingo, the chicken church. And then we took a bus into Burgos, and then she kept going. And she had a blast, by the way. She made friends from around the world and has gone back on her own since then. And walked a second time, and then had plans to go a third time this past year, or had plans to meet up with them in Italy and do something else. So I did that. And then Eric and I went in 2018 to Camino del Norte, which I had always been fascinated by, and did a 3-week walk. So we walked about half of it. We walked from the border from Maroon to Llanes.
Okay.
That, by the way, is beautiful. I mean, I know I'm here to talk about the book in France and Camino Francais and all that, but Camino del Norte is utterly beautiful as a walk.
Yeah, I think everybody's probably interested in hearing about the Norte. I've been hearing so much about it recently. Is it just the beauty? Is it because you're along the coast, or what is it about the Norte? Because I'm hearing a lot of people and they get this really dreamy look on their face when they go, oh, but the Norte.
It is definitely more scenic because you are walking along the coast. Because it is rainier, it is more green. Because you're in Basque country, you're within sight of the ocean, at least in that first half, at least every other day. But then you're looping down through these rolling fields and this rolling countryside. And I will say there's not as much sense of history to it. I think the Camino Francais held on to, because has always been the traditional pilgrimage route, and some of those towns were so small. It feels older. It feels more like a historic pilgrimage. Whereas the coastal towns had a tendency to get bombed in all of the wars. And so there are more people going to the coastal towns on holidays. You'll see more surfers, you'll see more vacationers, but the natural beauty of it is much stronger, or in my opinion. I'm a Pacific Northwesterner though. I need the ocean and I need the green.
Yeah, I get that. So did you feel like the Norte, did you have as many services, were there as many places to stop and get that second pilgrim breakfast? Was it harder to find accommodations? If you had to do a comparison in that way between the Frances and the Norte, what would you say?
I mean, the albergues are smaller. I remember when I first started on Norte and I would look at the guidebook and I'd be like, oh my gosh, it only has 25 beds. Like that will fill up so quickly. But there are fewer people walking the Norte. And so kind of staying on the same pattern, things were filling up at about the same rate. I don't think there was ever really a challenge of finding, that second breakfast, or at least the first breakfast. We had started walking in France. So we had gotten used to, you have breakfast where you start and you are packing your lunch, you're packing your snack, and then you have the big dinner. Was kind of our pattern anyway. And so you're walking through enough towns that there's fewer services specifically designed for pilgrims, for better or for worse, depending on what you're looking for. But you're never not without something.
Okay. So I'm curious, Beth, to kind of add on to Catherine's question. So you go back with your girlfriend, and then you go back again with Eric. How did you change? That first time you walked, did you just have like tons of stuff in your backpack that you never used? And then the next time you're like, I don't need all that stuff. Or did you find yourself kind of being like, oh, I've got this. This is going to be a breeze. And then found out that, oh, no, it wasn't. The second one wasn't a breeze. Or, what was different for you, and how were you different on the second and the third and so on?
I mean, I think part of it comes back to one of the questions you asked earlier about how much of this is based on the people who are around you, and how much of my first experience is based on the fact that I walked with my husband, who is, as you've read, extremely competent and charming and very good at a lot of things. And there are definitely days where I can easily just ride in his wake and let him do all the language and let him do all the translations.
Yeah.
When I went back without him. And I think my biggest experience, I was walking the same trail. I was walking Camino Francés. I'd already done it. But now I was the one who was setting the pace. I was the one who was ordering things in the restaurants. I was the one, my friend Laurel had less Spanish than I did. So I was the front line. And what that's like, what it's like to not be the slow walker and be the fast walker in the pair of people who you're with. It was mostly those kind of things. It was much more of a understanding myself. And then the Camino Norte, I think that one we had a lot of fun for most of it. My thirds are relative. The first couple of days were physically very hard, but we just had a good time because we had done this before. It was very easy to settle back into our patterns. When you're walking with the same person, carrying the same backpacks, pretty much following the same patterns.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, I have many more questions for Beth, but I want to open it up. If anybody wants to unmute and ask Beth a question, just give us a wave so we're not all unmuting at the same time. Any questions for her? You can always put them in the chat and I'll be more than glad to ask. I know there's something in the chat right now. I'll just double check.
And Helen says that pilgrims are not as special on the Norte, and there are lots of tourists. And I will say that there are a lot of people who are there for different reasons. I kind of felt as a pilgrim on Norte, I felt like I was not the spotlight or the centerpiece. And that worked for me. That was good for me to not feel like everything in this town exists so that I can be here. I wanted to observe. I felt like I got a chance to observe Spanish culture more on the Norte because there were fewer of us.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Any questions? Does anyone want to unmute and ask Beth anything? All right, well, keep thinking. Okay, yeah. Kathy, yes.
I just wanted to get Beth's take on what do you think is the biggest difference between the section between Le Puy and Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port and then the remainder of the trip? So the French versus Spanish sections.
One difference? I think a lot of Le Puy de Saint-Jean and Saint-Jean de Santiago come down to number of people. And everything that spins off of that comes down to number of people. When you're walking and you're seeing 20 people a day, when you're staying in gîtes, public gîtes, the municipals that only have 8 beds, because that's really how many people are passing through on a day. It's a very different experience. And this goes back to what I was just saying about Norte as well, is that I felt like I saw French culture much more than I saw Spanish culture on the Francais, because there were definitely days on Francais where there were more pilgrims in a town than there were residents. And so the flip side of that is that in France, when there's only 20 people walking, there's not a lot of services that are there just for the pilgrims. And it was very common to walk into a town and see all of the fermé signs on the market, and you have to plan ahead because nobody's going to have that café con leche for your second breakfast, your desayunos, because there's not enough people walking through to support that kind of industry. And so you drink your coffee at your gîte before you start going, and you carry your sausage and your cheese because you might not see another town until you get to your space for the end of the day. So I think there was I think it really comes down to that. It comes down to, but I knew people much better in France because I was seeing the same ones every day without that sense that there were so many other people surrounding us. Michelle, you had a question too, didn't you?
Yeah. Hey, Beth. I was in your workshop, so good to see you.
Hello.
Truly, by the way, she had a great workshop if you want to learn how to write a book. It was fabulous. So this is a little section because I know you say the book's not about you, but girl, it's about you. And it is.
I'm the narrator. Like, it is still a travel memoir.
Yes.
It's not about my mother.
They're very true. And there's a part of a Camino that you said is like that third part where it changes you on the inside, right?
Mhm.
And you understand yourself, and you kind of overcome your ego in parts of the Camino. So there's this one part I'm going to touch that I think was your point and your
Mhm.
moment. But I also want to know, because I'm going to share this, how do you get back to that moment after the Camino? So I'm just going to narrate or read this from her book. It says, in the opening paragraphs of her memoir tracts, Robin Davidson says, there are moments in life that are pivotal in which you experience turns, small intuitive flashes, when you know you've done something correct for a change, when you think you are on the right track. This was one of them. It was my moment of pure, uncomplicated confidence and lasted about 10 seconds. That was me. I was on top of a mountain beside a French castle on a spring morning. I was past my lists, my maps, my plans. I was entirely present.
I'm
How
so
do
glad you like that section.
That was
That is the section I always start when I do events. That's where I always start reading. I always think that was kind of one of my, that was absolutely, everybody says, everyone asks the like, oh, what was your favorite moment on the Camino? Have you had this? And you're like, I walked for 35 days or 50 days or 20 days or whatever. And you're like, I don't have one moment, but this is the moment I come back to.
So how do you keep that moment going, and how, after the Camino, because that's the thing we all want to do, is keep that Camino alive. Do you have any advice or anything to share?
So I like the question. I think that what is important to note about that is that it's introduced as this one small intuitive flash of moment. That I am absolutely in the right time, in the right place, and this is what I was meant to do, isn't something that I carried 24 hours a day on the Camino, let alone when I'm going to the grocery store and changing my oil and I have to figure out what's in those boxes back there.
All right.
I think that what I carried back with was an openness to looking for those moments more often.
Good.
Do I love the loading the U-Haul, unloading the U-Haul, figuring things out? No. Do I love the moments at the end of the day where I look around and I say, no, this is right. This is where I am supposed to be right now. And even if parts of it are uncomfortable, even if my pants are wet because the grass was wet, even if my feet hurt, even if I forgot, I didn't know how to eat breakfast, even if whatever that is, it's not expecting it all the time. It's recognizing and celebrating that moment when it happens.
Absolutely.
And finding that this is that perfect moment.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, and I found it for myself as well. It allowed me to, it kind of opened my eyes. It allowed me to be a seeker and seek for those moments in life, and seek for the angels and seek for the miracles, right? They're all in our lives every single day, but I think we just get in the mundaneness of life that we forget to open our eyes and seek. It's all around us at all times.
The number of surprises that happened every day is really what and I've never been able to figure out the right words to exactly say that, but I think Lee said it, like the coincidences of finding the right people at the right times, or being in the place when the sun comes up in just the way, or when the cows are walking down the street and chasing you, or whatever makes that moment important. That's what you're holding on to.
Yeah.
Through the next, 6 hours of slogging through mud. And that's okay. Part of this came back to, this was Eric's thing, but practicing acceptance I think ties back to that. I think celebrating the moments when everything is right and practicing acceptance are two lessons that go hand in hand. Because I accept when things are not perfect, because there are going to be those moments that are.
Yeah. Thank you. I felt you in that moment in the book, so I just wanted to call it out. So thank you for sharing it.
Thanks.
Great question, Michelle. I see that Roscoe had a question. So Roscoe.
Yeah, I'd like to know what made you decide to begin in Le Puy. I had been in Spain a few times and had walked the Camino de Frances, and I also had studied at the University of Nice for a
Mhm.
semester when I was in Europe on sabbatical.
Mhm.
But I'd never heard of Le Puy until I read your book.
Well, and like I said, I did what every good book loving person does. When I first heard about the Camino, I went to the library and I checked out whatever the library had. And it was a book called Pilgrimage to the End of the World that described somebody else's journey that started in Le Puy and went to Santiago. So that was my first introduction to the Camino. It turns out that there are 4 UNESCO recognized Camino trails in France that start in France, because some of the earliest literature about the Camino doesn't really mention Saint Jean, definitely doesn't mention it as a starting place. It's hard to get to if you're a medieval person traveling from their home. But there were 4 holy cities. There were 4 cities with big cathedrals that were already drawing pilgrims into places in France. And so those kind of became the starting routes for people who were then going on to Santiago. Le Puy, Arles, Vézelay, Paris, right? Yes. All already had their own relics before the remains of St. James were discovered. All were already part of this pilgrimage narrative. And I liked the idea of starting in a city that was mentioned in Codex Collectinus, that was mentioned in the earliest writings. There's Roscoe. You moved while I was talking, like Zoom does that thing. Yes. Helen?
I was just attending a Zoom Camino thing on Saturday from our Calgary chapter of the Canadian Company of Pilgrims.
Mhm.
And the first part of it was actually a video that was done by the Victoria chapter of an interview with a woman who had started at Le Puy.
Mhm.
And then following that, we had 3 other Calgary people who talked about their Camino starting at Le Puy. So it's
It keeps coming up.
Yeah, so it depends on the circle you're with, then
Mhm.
I guess it's common or not so common.
Mhm.
But
I think in 2019, I was at the American Pilgrims on the Camino has an annual gathering of people who are such Camino fans that they are traveling to meet together in person at a retreat center. And even there, even among the people who were, I'm going to say hardcore Camino followers, there was not a lot of knowledge. I did a talk about Le Puy, and it was fascinating how many people kind of walked away and went, oh, I didn't know about it. I didn't know that was a thing. But I also think that as the Camino Francais gets more crowded and people have walked that and then are looking for something else, a lot of those routes are seeing increases in traffic. And will be interesting to see what happens after this year.
Yeah, after the pandemic, the extension of the Holy Year, the Frances
Yeah.
is going to be busy. So do you think you'll go back, Beth? Will you walk another time? Is it on your bucket list to do another route, or?
I would love to finish the Norte. I would love to walk Primitivo. My actual plan last year was I've been in communication with a group called the British Pilgrimage Trust, who are in the UK, who have really done a lot of work to reestablish some of the historic walks in Britain. And they found a map that they think shows one of the original routes to Canterbury from Southampton. It's like a 250-mile walk across southern England. And they have been working with local parishes, especially churches in some of the smaller villages that are having a hard time staying open and staying relevant, and have made arrangements with them so that you can stay in the churches and visit different pieces. So before the pandemic, Eric and I were planning to take a month-long sabbatical last fall and go walk across southern England. I do not know where that stands right now, but I would love to do Primitivo. I would love to do Norte. My sister's about to move to Portugal, so I suspect that I will end up on the Portuguese at some point.
Yeah.
There are options. There are so many options.
So many. Helen, did you have another question?
I actually had a comment. It was based on something that you had said when you and I can't remember an earlier conversation, and I thought it's something that I've not heard anybody else ever mention this, and I've not actually remembered to ask it at any other Camino thing. But when I got back from my first Camino, everybody looked at me weirdly. People looked at me and they would just sort of like, what is so different? And there was some, one of my coworkers says, it looks like you've come from another planet or something. It looks like you have this supernatural, or they couldn't quite describe it, but a lot of people commented that you look really different without being able to say why I looked different. And I remember sort of seeing an ex-boyfriend who just sort of like kept looking at me. It's just sort of like, what the heck is different?
You're
and
glowing.
I remember a few years later, asking a girlfriend who was sort of like, do you remember when I got back? And there were a bunch of people saying this, like, did you notice that I looked different or anything like that? And she said, that was the reason why I decided to do the Camino, was the way that you looked. Has anybody else encountered that?
Yes, absolutely.
It hasn't happened in other Caminos,
Did that
unfortunately.
happen to you, Beth?
Mostly when we got back, to be
has
honest,
anybody
everybody
else
just
had-
commented on how big Eric's beard had grown. So there's
Speaking
that.
of Eric,
He's,
speaking of
I'm
Eric,
sorry, Lee. He's at work tonight.
we're not going
So
to
we
get to
have
see
done-
wonderful
yes.
Eric.
We have done other book clubs where Eric has made an appearance at the end, but he is not home right now. So you're stuck with me.
Well, we're not with you. We're delighted to have you, but please give him our best regards.
His warm brown eyes, that women of a certain age.
That the way that you capture him, and he just comes across so lovely, and just I think everybody falls a little bit in love with him. You know, he just seemed like a perfect walking partner.
That's
And
okay. I'll share.
yeah, you're very blessed to have him as a partner in life, it looks like, as he is blessed to have you. So anyway, we are at our 1 hour mark. I can't believe it. I feel like these times go so fast. So I just wanted to give one last call. If anyone has one last question for Beth, I know she's got to get some unpacking done, so I want to be respectful of her time. So anyone have one last question that we want to pose to Beth? Even if you just want to say how much you loved her book. People are saying stuff in the chat right now.
Michelle, Graham is a friend of mine on Twitter, and I haven't read the book
Yes.
steps forward yet, but it is on my list. It is on. Once I have bookshelves again, it'll be on my bookshelf.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's written more like a girly novel. Until all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, it's the Camino. And so I really enjoyed it. And it's got the two main characters in it, the gal from California and the gentleman from the UK. So it's enjoyable.
Yeah.
It's the only book I ever read 4 times.
That's
Thank
awesome.
Thank you, Roscoe.
Roscoe, you got to put that on her Amazon reviews.
Right.
Yeah, if you haven't reviewed her book, maybe do that. I hear from a lot of authors that really does make a difference.
I have to tell you guys will appreciate this. Speaking of book reviews, is I had my first 1-star book review on Goodreads was someone complaining because it didn't have nearly enough to do, like it wasn't a good sequel or follow-up to John Grisham's novel Camino Island. And I went, oh, okay. I'll take that. That's true. That's set in Florida.
What a relief that must have been, though. I can't imagine a 1 star coming up and being like, oh. So great that it wasn't about your book. And I don't know how anyone could.
I really actually think that they meant to put it on the other John Grisham book and just missed. And that's fine. I think it's hilarious. I'm going to like put it in my marketing materials.
That's great. Do you have any other workshops coming up? I want to give you a chance to plug that if you are.
I do not actually. Usually I do. I'm in the middle of writing a book for somebody else and I've been moving. So everything is a little chaotic. But my website, if you are interested in knowing more about books, I will put both of these things just in the chat. But my website for all things publishing is bethjusino.com. Nice and easy. And if you are interested in seeing more of the Camino stuff, if you have not seen the pictures that tie to this trip or the book, or some of the articles, Camino ×2 is a website I am not doing a good job at keeping up right now, but I did for about 4 years. So there's a lot of back content there. Articles about packing, book reviews, some of the same stories that you've read in the book, only with pictures. And if I'm just kind of spamming you with links, if you read the book and you are interested in seeing the photos that tie back to that specific trip, they are all on a Flickr site. So if you just want to see the pictures from that Le Puy all the way to Santiago, if you want to see what Jan, my little Dutch guy with the giant backpack, looked like, if you want to see the Dane, if you want to see people, that is where to go for that.
And I will capture all the sites that she just put on there and put them in the comments when I post the video and things to Facebook. So if you don't have a chance to copy them, I'll make sure that they're with the post. So wow, if everybody wants to unmute and just give a big thanks to Beth. Beth, I'm so grateful for you coming on. Corey and I were just delighted that how eager you were to share your stories with the Camino Cafe, and we just can't thank you enough. So thank you for all the things.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.
This whole Zoom thing has been one of the benefits of this last year of pandemic. Seeing faces and talking to people really does help.
Absolutely. You know, I think about that all the time, Beth. Like, you know, I probably would have never met you. I would have never dreamed that I would be speaking directly to an author of any book that I've read. And this has just been such a blessing of the pandemic. And I know it's going to make my next Camino just that much richer. So
there you go. Well, thanks everybody. It was great to be here.
Thank
Good luck
you.
unpacking.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Stay on for a minute. If you have any questions about upcoming events, stay on with us. We'll be glad to answer them.